Good evening. You're either watching or listening to Redwood Wonk. I'm with David Frank. My name is Eric Kirk. We are talking national political news of the day, and there's a lot going on. We're going to start with the Hunter Biden and Joe Biden. Last week, the House approved the impeachment inquiry. They're not articles of impeachment that were voted on, just an inquiry to be able to subpoena witnesses. It's not entirely clear. I've read it as to exactly what crime or misdemeanor, high crime or misdemeanor that they're potentially investigating. But they have voted to move forward with an inquiry, which is a formality that could lead to articles of impeachment at a future date. Comer has been, who is the head of the committee out of which it came, has been under a lot of pressure to generate something. And the biggest news from that was last week. Actually before that they subpoenaed Hunter Biden to come testify, and he came and he wants to testify in open air in front of the cameras. They want him to just do a deposition in the back room, but nobody in the public has been able to view the subpoena. Apparently, Comer has kept it under seal for now. I imagine there's probably 1,000 Freedom of Information Act requests pertaining to it. However, Ocasio-Cortez held a press conference, I think yesterday, saying that the subpoena offered a choice, even if the letter to Hunter Biden's attorneys didn't. So he wants to testify openly. Republicans say no, it's got to be private. Of course, they prefer that because then they can just take out clips of his testimony, perhaps even out of context, in their favor. Maybe they're afraid of the theater. Maybe they're afraid they don't know what's going to happen. But this is really what's in the news about that. He actually issued a press conference with the help of Representative Swalwell, who was formerly a presidential candidate and is a Californian House representative who's been a lot of right wingers are pointing out that he's the one who slept with the Chinese woman who was a spy. A lot of intrigue there, but he's actually basically a Democrat who gave Hunter Biden. Anyway, there's a lot of theater going on here. It's hard to sort through what's really going on until we actually get to see what the subpoena says. All we have is letters, Comey's letter to the attorney, which is the long thing, basically more political than legal. So there's a lot to talk about there, and maybe we should start with what is the Biden the impeachment inquiry, and where's it going to lead, Dave?
So thank you for that setup, as always. I think that the sort of the overall question of what are they looking to try to find and where do they think it's going to go? Let's talk about who they are. So it's the House Oversight and Judiciary Committees in a combined subpoena, Committee on Oversight and Accountability. So it's Chairman James Comer, Republican from Kentucky, and also the Judiciary Committee Chair Jim Jordan, Republican from Ohio. So they're, in their own statement, they basically say Hunter Biden defied a lawful subpoena. So now we're going to charge him with contempt. Our committees wanted to depose Hunter Biden, but he decided he wanted to grandstand basically and do this PR stunt, which he claims and his lawyer claim was his right based on the invitation. But in effect, what they're claiming is that Joe Biden said he was not financially involved with his family's business dealings, but evidence shows he did meet with Hunter Biden's business associates and his name was at the center of the family business strategy. So that's about it. In other words, they have like that check that, where Joe Biden apparently repaid Hunter Biden, or vice versa, rather. Hunter Biden, there was a check in the family that was mailed to Joe Biden's house, I think it was, and they said, see, he really was in the middle of it, but in fact, Hunter lived there. So really, what they're claiming is that Hunter Biden's obstruction by not answering questions in front of the committee, it reinforces their need for a formal process, and their claim is because President Biden and his family need to be held accountable, and they're claiming it's corruption and obstruction. In reality, I think the truth is a little bit more in alignment with what Hunter Biden's lawyer said. That's Abby Lowell. And he said basically there's a new indictment out there with, a bunch of tax avoidance charges,
Yeah.
9 tax related charges, failing to pay 1.4 million. But in reality, that's not really related to the claims by the committee. And so what Abby Lowell said is, based on the facts and in law, there's no new evidence. If Hunter's last name was anything other than Biden, those charges would not have been brought. So, from the outside looking in, honestly, it's kind of a fishing expedition. They're looking to find a way to public theater, to have Biden's name and family name be scrutinized about maybe some improprieties in Hunter's past that are peripherally or not related at all to anything to do with the president.
I mean, I think we've discussed this on the show many times that Hunter Biden appears to have been, and probably still is, a BS artist. This is what he does, and he clearly was using his father's name, and apparently his father may have sort of helped him out by meeting with somebody on an airport tarmac in Europe somewhere for like a 10-minute meeting somewhere in a restaurant when people had their cameras out, their phones out, and basically not telling Hunter Biden to shut it down, not use his name, to suggest that he's got more influence than he had. They don't have any evidence of actual influence peddling. And so they're jumping on the statement that he wasn't financially connected to simply say that, well, he helped him out otherwise and left all the money to his son, right, rather than make any money himself. We have reference to the big guy, but yeah, that's what they have. The tax, I looked at the tax indictment earlier today. Of the 9, 6 of them are misdemeanor failure to pay or failure to file. The 3 felonies are related to the fact that apparently he made up business deductions. The part of what the Comer and the committees want to establish is they want to know how he did it. This brand new crime of making up business deductions, like it's never happened before, and like Congress needs to get to it. I mean, how many people in Congress did it? Who knows? But to the extent that he did it, and he will be under due process. That claim was actually filed in California. And he will face charges on that. And if he's convicted, he could face, in theory, up to 17 years in prison, though I really have a hard time believing that there'll be a sentence that long for tax evasion. Just doesn't happen, even if your name is Biden. But in terms of the hearings, yeah, he's basically not responding to the subpoenas the way they want him to. If AOC is right, they're going to have to reissue them if they want to limit it to a private rather than public. And it may be that some attorney checked the wrong boxes or something on it, but we haven't been able to see them. They're nowhere to be found online. No media source has them yet, and AOC just made it an issue of it. So we'll see if she's telling the truth. But the Republicans are also kind of caught in a situation here because they established a precedent, including Jordan himself, that responding to congressional subpoenas is optional. So they didn't do it. So where's their moral high ground there? Well, they're going to argue it's different because he's the president's son. or that it's a private person rather than somebody in Congress. I don't know what they're going to argue. I'm not even sure what they've argued. I think they just avoid those arguments. But the fact of the matter is, they set the precedent. Court says we're not going to get involved. So what do they do? Do they send the lone house cop out to make arrests and bring them in? I don't know what they do about that. But they've got themselves in a jam. What they're going to do next, who knows?
So a couple things came up in your some of the things you described. So one is you actually originally asked me, what's the deal with the impeachment inquiry? Why did they need to formally go that route? And I guess it's because of what you said, basically, that the precedent was set that it's okay to ignore these congressional subpoenas if you claim to have a reason to do so. And so they figured that if it was a formal impeachment hearing and the actual impeachment filing, if there were articles of impeachment, that would certainly be different case. Then those subpoenas would have much more weight. The Department of Justice would probably be obligated to participate in enforcement. But they've chosen this middle ground where they're saying, well, we want our subpoenas to have a little bit more clout. We're getting signals from the White House that the president is not going to comply. So if we call it an impeachment inquiry, it moves the ball a little bit forward in the severity or import in following it, acknowledging and honoring that subpoena. I think that that's procedural, and it's also to a certain extent wishful thinking that there's an inquiry doesn't have more clout necessarily from the perspective of a sitting president. So that's again a little bit more theater. But the other thing that you said was what are they? What's the deal here? Like, what are they actually? What's the end game in terms of what evidence they think they're going to find that could possibly lead to formal impeachment filing. And so, I think Congressmember Mace from South Carolina, she's said, well, we've seen, behind closed doors, we've seen some things. But the reality is that if it was sufficiently important and relevant, they would have talked about it by now. And I think that's part of the reason why Hunter Biden was basically saying, hey, I'm going to go forward and let's do this publicly and let's see where you stand, because chances are it's just a fishing expedition or, some other metaphor or simile to that. And so it's a little bit of checkers. It's not quite chess, to step in and say, hey, you told me I could either talk, publicly or talk to a behind closed doors in a formal deposition. But there's not a lot of teeth either way. So I think that it's strategically dismissive of the standing of these committees because there's so little known about any valid evidence.
Yeah, and again, Jordan has got a problem. Okay, it wasn't a formal impeachment inquiry, but technically speaking, he's actually still under subpoena order right now. He's supposed to do it. I guess Congress, the House can't revoke it. I'm not sure quite how that happened. And it's whether or not the impeachment inquiry gives it more legal standing. Most people aren't going to understand that if they're lay people. I'm not even sure the law says anything about that. I think a subpoena is a subpoena. If Congress has a legitimate purpose, then they're supposed to do it. But the court also set a precedent of saying, oh, we don't interfere in matters of Congress when they refused it for actual impeachment hearings. Because if we remember correctly, the Democrats were actually arguing in court simultaneous to the impeachment hearings that these subpoenas should be honored, and the courts just basically have said, even Democrats just said, Congress, you got to take care of your own. You can't come to us to handle your internal situation.
They're ruining our country. And it's true. They're destroying the blood of our country. That's what they're doing. They're destroying our country. They don't like it when I said that. And I never read Mein Kampf. They said, oh, Hitler said that in a much different way. And they're destroying the blood of our country. They're destroying the fabric of our country. and we're going to have to get them out. We have no idea who any of them are. They come from Africa. They come from Asia. They come from South America, but not just South America. They're all over the world. They dump them on the border and they pour into our country.
All right, Donald Trump. Well, he has done it again. We have, as we've discussed on this show, and pundits all over the country have discussed. One of the main issues that bolstered Trump and MAGA in 2016, and also provided a lot of energy in 2020, and is now playing out, is the issue of immigration and the border. And we remember back in 2016, he made the famous Black Snake speech, where he compared immigration to that. He also referred to all the rapists coming in from Mexico and other countries, and really made a big deal. Even though he says, "Oh, not all immigrants." I mean, he really demonized them, and that's been a major part of his campaign. He is not backing off of that, and more recently, he said, "They are destroying the blood of our country." Trump told supporters, "They're destroying our country." He actually, at some point, said, "Poisoning the blood of our country," and people pointed out that is a direct quote from Mein Kampf, Hitler. I mean, and a lot of other comparisons have been made between Trump and Hitler. The guy who actually coined the term or came up with Godwin's rule says it's completely appropriate to make those comparisons. But he's saying, "I never read Mein Kampf." Hitler said that in a much different way. Well, maybe it's true that he didn't do that, but the point is that he's tapping in to the very same forces that Hitler did to rise to power. There's just no denying that. He's not attacking Jews per se, but plenty of other groups, and the media in general. These are all, and the intelligentsia and all of the things that typically fascism in its Italian and German and other forms have attacked. This is from the playbook, and it's so much that Nikki Haley came out strong and said it's not helpful. Who are talking about it, but he is somebody who doesn't back down. He will repeat the comments because his base doesn't care if it's in Mein Kampf, at least the core of his base. Will it have effect on others? We don't know, but right now he's just wanting to secure the Republican nomination before he goes on. It is scapegoating at its worst, and it is dangerous. It has led to violence. Right now, the violence, ethnic hate violence has been increasing since he first came to office, actually since he first started running. Where do we go with all this, Dave?
Yeah, so I think what's really interesting here is if we take a half step back and think about the overall context of, why is this so successful? Why is this strategy so successful for Trump to tap in to this line of rhetoric? And in part, you can go no further than just listening to the interviews or the press releases from the Freedom Caucus. So the new chair of the House Republican Freedom Caucus, his name is Representative Bob Good from Virginia. So he kind of points out how, from their perspective, the political hot button that they are pressing relates to the 10,000 or more people that are trying to cross the border each day. And it was declared an emergency when it was 1,000 people a day, but now you and I've been covering this for the better part of a year as it's gotten worse and worse. There's a lot of thoughtful people saying a lot of really thoughtful things. That's not what we're hearing, obviously, from the electioneering side of the Republican members of the House. So instead, they're turning around this very real crisis and pointing it directly at the fact that President Biden overturned one of the rules that President Trump put in place, which was gave the custom border uh, group the authority to basically, in a sense, deport people immediately back to Mexico while they're awaiting their asylum hearing. So by
Right.
undoing that COVID era emergency rule, what they're able to do, because that happened, and because of the demagoguery that says the border is open, there's a catastrophe at the border, everybody is coming, they're ruining America. Well, they're starting to come in greater and greater numbers. Multiple more people. Um, and so what they're saying is his exact words were that there's a border invasion, and that never before in the history of the country has a president intentionally caused harm to the country the way President Biden is facilitating the border invasion. So with that in mind, with sort of the Trump base, let's call it, people that make up the Freedom Caucus. Now, granted, it's a bigger group than just Trump people. I don't mean to say that entire
Sure.
group supports Trump, but that's
Right.
a big portion of his base. I think people would agree, regardless of whether you want to hear anything critical or not about this. So the question is, if there's a border invasion that Biden is facilitating, who's coming, who's invading, and then that's when Trump, his specialty here is to use the language of vilification and otherization. So I think it's really important. You mentioned Godwin's law. I actually worked with Mike Godwin before.
Oh,
Yeah, so I had a chance to speak with him about parallel issues. Of course, this was years ago, and it didn't have to do with Trump necessarily, but with Godwin's law. Just so people who aren't familiar with it, Politico interviewed him. So everything I say in the next few minutes is going to be based on his most recent comments directly related to Trump. But
right.
Godwin's law is that as an online discussion continues, the probability of a reference or comparison to Hitler or Nazis approaches one, which means 100%. And he basically says that he came up with this as a funny way to make it like an objective law of nature to account for the fact that people tend to project, oh my God, you believe this, you must be Hitler. Oh my God, you believe this, you must be a Nazi. So why Godwin's so important? Why was he interviewed by Politico? And why did you mention him in the first place? It's because he's saying, well, democracy is fragile, and the purpose of a democracy isn't necessarily that we're going to put the best candidate in power. It's so that we can maintain our democracy even when the worst people are in power, and that's a big lift. That's his
Yeah.
quote. He says that's a big lift.
I
And
just
so,
want to real
yeah,
quickly
go
also
for it.
say in articles and comments in the past, he said that he came up with the law as a tendency. He wanted to clarify. I think you can find in Wikipedia that it doesn't necessarily mean that the comparison is invalid. It's just that is the tendency of people to go there, valid or invalid.
And you hit the nail on the head, because in this case, mainstream media writ large, pretty much, and everyone who's left leaning or center left leaning is saying he's actually quoting Hitler here. Like, this is very much out of the Hitler playbook. So what Godwin steps forward and says, if it was the case that Trump parroted Hitler by saying, for example, that they're poisoning the blood of our country, that would be one comment. Maybe it's a coincidence. But if he says another comment that says that these people are vermin, again, another Hitler quote, he's
Right.
saying that that's not a coincidence. So really, there is something thematic going on. And Godwin himself, not to quote him because he's not necessarily the authority here, but he's saying he personally doesn't believe that this is an accident. And why that's important is because for Hitler, his dehumanizing rhetoric was effective.
Effective.
Yeah, and so and similar here, Godwin mentions this is what Trump's doing because he's crafting the language, he's getting the applause lines, he's getting good press in the media, and it's going viral. He doesn't use the word viral, but if basically repeating these lines leads to the viral mass media spread of these things, and that's free press. That's spreading his word popular. And the big takeaway here, I would say, is that again, this is just Godwin talking, but it's relevant to why people are using this Hitler comparison, is because he's saying for whatever reason there is a part of Trump's base that wants to hear the message. and he's catering to them because apparently, just by virtue of him doing it over and over again and not being worried about the criticism, the critical nature of the press coverage, as he finds it personally rewarding for himself, and he believes it may be necessary to motivate people to help him get elected. So again, it's that effective argument. This is from the Politico interview of Mike Godwin, talking about why it might be relevant for people to point out that this is like you said, the article doesn't say the word fascist, but realistically, that's what we're talking about. And because that's so effective at rallying the base,
Yeah.
that's why that is echoing across the media ecosystem currently.
I mean, it worked for Hitler. We know that. It was, he was a word master, and he made the choices right then and there. We do know that and this is not to say even that Trump is a Nazi. I don't think he's a Nazi. I don't. It's but he is not afraid to use that rhetoric. He's got Nazis supporting him. He does, he's some of them are good people or whatever, but but it is real important that to understand that this also isn't accidental. He's possibly desensitizing people. We've talked about it to the talk. The same thing we talked about last week with his dictatorship on the first day. I mean, he is sensitizing, and there are a large number of people in his base, maybe other bases too, but in his base who don't think that democracy is necessarily what we need in this country right now. They want a strong leader. That's what they want. They want the machismo. They want the sense of decisiveness, and that's what he's providing, because that is what these type of leaders do, and demagoguery works. And it's weird that he took the exact words, and it's kind of interesting that he says, I've never read Mein Kampf, and then a few sentences later says, and I didn't say it the way he did. Well, if you didn't read it, how do you know how he said it, right? I mean, it's just, and the fact of the matter is, I actually strongly recommend people read books about the rise. And there is a book called The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich. Also, Inside the Third Reich by Albert Speer, somebody who had actually been raised kind of liberal and got sucked in. Hitler didn't talk all that. He knew his audiences, and he was much more reflective early on. But then when he got into the rallies, he would be more fiery. But he brought people in from elite areas by basically minimalizing it and not speaking the same way. You speak differently to a different person. Anyway, Hitler was not just a blowhard. He was a master at getting people behind him, and so is Donald Trump. He may be stupid in some ways, and maybe deliberately so in some ways, but he's not. He knows what he's doing here, and he's somebody who's in trouble, a little bit desperate, and needs to win this election. So the question is this going to work with the American public, and is this 240 plus year experiment in danger? And that's something we really have to think about. We've talked about this.
So I would say that again, take a half step back. The reality on the ground for many people, there's about 3,100 counties in America. A small minority of those counties are blue counties. The vast majority of these counties are red counties. So in terms of geography, there's a lot of people who are, at least on the face of it, experiencing economic stress,
Yeah.
whether it comes from just lack of jobs in general, or the inflation, just the cost of living going up, all services, everything.
Yes. This morning, NPR said that there are 44 million who are food insecure.
That's tragic.
Yeah.
That's 15% of the country. I mean, that's people going to bed hungry. I mean, this is real stress. And so it's really, I don't want to say it's easy. Easy is not the best word choice, but it's understandable that when you see videos of arguably close to a million people, close to 100,000 people a week coming to the border, that you could say, hey, these people are willing, they're hungrier, and they're probably willing to work a little bit less. They're probably going to be cut in line here for jobs, etc. That's how the mind works. You just see that as a real threat to your own material well-being. So what did Congress do? Congress has a bill. The House has a bill that they put forward and they passed in the House, but it's probably going nowhere in the Senate. It's called the Secure the Border Act of 2023. Why is that important? Because this bill, H.R. 2, is being held out there as there's no way we give money to Ukraine unless H.R. 2 passes. Now, in the Senate, that side is not taking these things very seriously. So there is a potential impasse, which will strongly affect the White House's bargaining power, which we've talked about before. But again, not to get too in the weeds on this, but why are the House members and the Freedom Caucus folks, why are they so confident they could draw the line here and say, we won't do anything you want until you do this? And it's parole and asylum reform, like we talked about. Those are the two pieces of it that the Senate is entertaining. But they're also talking about E-Verify, making E-Verify mandatory for all employers. That would materially impact the ability of the agricultural sector, the meatpacking industry. I don't mean to vilify them or call them out. There are a bunch of industries that would really be threatened if E-Verify was mandatory. So this is the thing that they want. They want to say, how do we protect jobs? They also want to build more of a border wall. They also want to increase, drone surveillance at the border, increase customs and border protection staffing, and finally upgraded technology at the border. And what they're saying is, nothing else you want we're going to do until we get this. And it plays into, it's like the buttress. It's complementary to Trump's grandstanding about the threat, perceived or real, of not having a robust and effective border system. So it's the lowest common denominator, but I think it's important to point out that Trump isn't just doing this in a vacuum. And one last thing before I kind of hand over to you. Trump's ex-wife, who's deceased now, it came out this week that she told a journalist, she went on the record as saying that he had Hitler speeches at his bedside, and that he actually, he found, apparently found inspiration or insights in those pieces to kind of shape his rhetorical skills. So it's any claim that he doesn't know about this stuff. I mean, I don't think that that's as credible. It certainly seems like he knows about it, and rhetoric is rhetoric. If it's your job, if it's your goal, stoke people up. I don't think people are going to hold it against him. I don't think his supporters are going to hold it against him when he appears to have their best interests in mind.
No, definitely rallies the base. Maybe doesn't expand his vote, but definitely rallies them.
Senator Reverdy Johnson worried that the final version of Section 3 did not include the office of the presidency. He stated this amendment does not go far enough because past rebels may be elected president or vice president of the United States. So he asked, why did you omit to exclude them? I do not understand them to be excluded from the privilege of holding the two highest offices in the gift of the nation. Senator Lott Morrill fielded this objection. He replied, let me call the senator's attention to the words, or hold any office, civil or military, under the United States. This answer satisfied Senator Johnson, who stated, perhaps I am wrong as to the exclusion from the presidency. No doubt, I am.
This brings us to our last and probably the biggest topic of the three. Colorado issued a landmark decision. The Supreme Court of Colorado, after an appeal of a district court, a trial court finding, has declared that under the 14th Amendment, the Section 3, that the former President Donald J. Trump is not qualified to be on the Colorado ballots because he participated in an insurrection. Basically, the 14th Amendment, or Section 3, states that if you have participated in an insurrection or rebellion, you do not qualify for a bunch of public offices or just about anything. Well, Colorado also has a unique law that basically gives the courts the power to make a determination as to whether or not somebody is qualified from the ballot. I don't have the time to go into all of the legalities of this. When you put the actual Supreme Court, Colorado Supreme Court decision with the 3 dissents, and I strongly recommend you read it all. That's about 205 pages, and I just can't get into all of the nuances here. But one of the key issues that Colorado came to, Trump actually, this was the case of Anderson versus Griswold. Trump entered the case as an intervener, party in interest, which you can do, and the case was decided at trial. I'm not up on the process that happened, but there was a trial. I remember because Trump was trying to get the case dismissed right away. It is partly based on one of the opposition to it, and you'll see it in the dissent, is that states don't have jurisdiction to basically enforce the 14th Amendment, Section 3. This is rejected for a number of reasons, but another argument they made is you're not even the states don't even select the president. The candidate isn't the real person. You're selecting electors. But the Supreme Court majority cited some case law that says that basically we are now voting for candidates who are proxies for their pledged electors. So yes, they are on the ballot. Maybe that's not how it was 150 years ago when you actually voted for electors and you trusted them to go to the convention and make the right decision as to who to choose for president. That's not the case anymore. So, and they cite some case law. I haven't had a chance to go read all of their case law, but and then as to whether or not this is a good decision, just depends on who you talk to. You've got Lawrence Tribe saying it was a great decision. I'm forgetting the name of the former judge who was actually testified at the January 6th hearing, saying it's a masterful decision.
Michael Ledig.
Right, that's right. Ty Cobb, who was an attorney under Trump, but is a bit of a never-Trumper now, says that he thinks it's going to go down in flames 9-0, including the liberal justices. Of course, they probably will take this on an expedited manner. The Colorado Supreme Court agreed to stay the impact of the ruling until January 5th. That gives, again, Supreme Court's going to be getting a lot of briefing. Trump, by the way, just a side note, is trying to delay the other issue that's going to face him. He's asking, for more time there. So, but he definitely does not want to ask for more time in this one, because if this goes into effect on January 5th, he won't be on the ballot anyway. So naturally, the Republican candidates are all criticizing the decision because they have to, because the Trump base is real strong. But this is very complex law, but that doesn't even matter. Is the Supreme Court so partisan that that they're going to decide against it anyway? Who knows? But this is an unprecedented matter. It can't happen in every state, by the way, because not every state has the same laws. That's what one of the dissenters says. It's going to lead to chaos because some states have empowered this and some states haven't. One of the arguments against it is saying that we shouldn't be even enforcing Section 3 at all until Congress passes some implementing legislation. Well, they haven't done that in 150 years or whatever since the 14th Amendment was passed. So, what are they waiting for if that is the recommendation? And it does say in the 14th Amendment that Congress shall draft laws to implement the provisions of this. But that doesn't mean that it isn't self-active. The other aspects of the 14th Amendment have been held. For instance, holding basic rights enforcing against the states, which was brand new, was held without implementing legislation. I could go on about the legalities of this, but it's real hard. We can talk about the political impact too, and a little bit towards the end. But this is a stunning decision. I mean, I didn't see it coming. I thought that they'd be overturned at the Colorado Supreme Court.
So thank you for that setup. I think, like you said, it is complex, and it could be something that we dedicate an hour or more to, but we're going to try to boil it down a little bit. So first thing is just because you said the name of the case, Anderson Griswold, but just so folks know, it's really a group of 6 Republicans joined by a watchdog group called Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington, and they're filing in the district court in Colorado saying, hey, he's disqualified because of this part of the 14th Amendment, this Section 3 14th Amendment, because it says, in effect, that anybody who's been involved in support or participation, we can get the exact verbiage, engaged in insurrection or rebellion, would be banned, prohibited from serving in high office, basically. And it goes through a bunch of offices. It doesn't name the president, but it says an officer. And the idea was that none of the Confederate participants would be eligible to be in the post-Civil War government. It turns out in practice that there was a final sentence in that language that basically says that the Congress can, with a 2/3 vote,
Yes.
Here it is. But Congress may, by a vote of 2/3 of each house, remove such a disability. And that's actually what happened after the Civil War. Many of these folks wanted to just get back to business as usual. Reconstruction was a failure. Reconstruction led to Jim Crow, and in part because the country wasn't ready yet for the implications of what this piece of legislation actually spelled out. The country didn't want Confederates to be barred. And in fact, that's where we are. That's why I'm fast forwarding through that, because I want to say what's behind this. Why does Lawrence Tribe and Judge Lysak, why are they thinking this is such a big open and shut case? Michael Ludwig, rather. Why do they think this is an open and shut case? Well, because there was a paper authored by Federalist Society members in good standing, University of Chicago professor William Baud, and University of St. Thomas professor Michael Stokes Paulson. And they wrote this paper that was in the Law Review article, UPenn, I believe, Law Review. And it basically goes through the language definitions of what it would mean to be engaged in an insurrection or rebellion, and what it would mean to giving aid or comfort. And they're saying that, look, this number one, this meets that threshold. So we agree on that, according to them. And both Lawrence Tribe, who's a liberal, and Michael Ludwig, who's a conservative, prominent, one of the most prominent conservative judges in the country, so much so that all of the Supreme Court justices have some of his former staff members as clerks. Like he's that prominent. Certainly all the Republican appointees. But so number two, they say that it's self-executing, like you said. So what does that mean? It means it's just like not being 35 years old, right? Either you are or you aren't 35. Well, this is you either are or you aren't an insurrectionist. They say that's open and shut. And then they basically say if there's any, in their paper, they say if there's any single official anywhere in the entire U.S. electoral system, if they agree with this constitutional analysis, they need to act on it. And so it's basically saying we're not, the system of sorting this out isn't entirely clear, but please, they're calling out, please, someone get the ball rolling. And so that's what happened here in Colorado. And it was, like I said, University of Pennsylvania Law Review. And so by saying it applies, by saying it's automatic, then it leads to what then? And that's where I think you threw it over to me. I'll give you a bite at this apple. But why do you think that and I'll mention this case. There's the Griffin case, which is 1869 yes. Circuit Court Judge Samuel Chase, who later became the Chief Justice. He said, well, this amendment says what it says, but we can't follow it. So I don't know if you want to go into that a little bit, because I think the Supreme Court is going to pick up on this lead of why we can't follow this, even if it makes sense.
Yeah, one of the dissenters brought that up. Of note, the three dissenters didn't come together in unity. They each had a separate reason for it. But yes, Griffin basically said that for us to be able to enforce this, we need to have, that Congress needs to establish some laws, yeah, we need to that helps us to implement it so we can move forward. And the rest, the 14th Amendment, it brings up the fact that the 14th Amendment was actually passed under questionable circumstances to some people. Basically, you need a certain number of states, 3/4 of them, to ratify an amendment. And so they actually had them, but before they actually tallied it up over the 3/4, a couple of the states actually withdrew or attempted to withdraw their ratification, and it was deemed passed because Congress doesn't, the Constitution does not provide for a method of unratifying once a state ratifies, and conservatives said it's common sense, which is ironic because usually conservatives argue for strict construction. You got to go by what's actually written, not by what you think is implied, or you're imposing your own law. It's complicated, but Griffin will be cited intensely. I think it's also worth reading the 14th, the third, section 3. I'll just be real quick here. The provision that we're talking about is no person shall be a senator or representative in Congress or elector of president and vice president or hold any office, civil or military, under the United States or under any state, who having previously taken an oath as a member of Congress or as an officer of the United States or as a member of any state legislature or as an executive or judicial officer of any state to support the Constitution of the United States shall have engaged in insurrection or rebellion against the same or given aid and comfort to the enemies thereof. But Congress may, by a vote of 2/3 of each house, remove such disability. Now, one of the arguments that was made that nobody's really taking seriously is the president isn't specifically named in there, but he certainly is, somebody holding office, civil or military, under the United States. And I mean, it's not why they didn't mention president specifically, who knows? But that's not being taken seriously as much as whether or not a state has a jurisdiction here, given the lack of guidance from Congress. And I am going to, in my prediction at the end, actually tell what I think the Supreme Court is going to do, and I'll get into slightly more detail as to what this involved. But I want to also read the one dissenter, and because most other states don't have the election code provisions we do, they won't be able to enforce Section 3. That in turn will inevitably lead to the disqualification of President Trump from the presidential primary ballot in less than all 50 states, thereby risking chaos in our country. This can't possibly be the outcome the framers intended. The framers, this is something that where I really criticize original intent people and strict constructionists. Those are two different concepts, by the way. The framers' opinions about it are irrelevant because the 14th Amendment, when it passed, all the framers were dead. They had no say in it. So the 14th Amendment transformed the Constitution in some very profound ways. So it's not really, it doesn't really matter what the framers intended, and this would be heresy in some people. It's what the drafters of the 14th Amendment intended. And it's not necessary that somebody be on all of the primary maps. We've had people run for president who aren't on ballot on all of the states. They do it all the time. So so the chaos is he doesn't get the electors in that particular state or the delegates in that particular state. A lot of other things have been raised, everything from the political parties are private parties and not subject to regulation, but that's been rejected because in all kinds of cases. I can go on. It's the issues I've just even touched on the legal issues, but I'll let you close out on the legality, and then maybe we should talk about the politics of this.
Yeah, I'll try to transition from legal to political because I think that we have to try to anticipate what the Supreme Court's going to do, and what I'm seeing is that if you look at Chase, what he actually said is that he's saying his quote is, surely a construction which fails to accomplish the main purpose of the amendment, works mischief and inconveniences, is repugnant to the first principles of justice and right embodied in other provisions, is not to be favored if any other reasonable construction can be found. And what these justices did in the state Supreme Court level is they're saying, hey, he wasn't even found guilty of insurrection. And if our history is that we're going to let former Confederate folks participate in the governmental process, then surely the former president should participate unless he's proven guilty. So they're saying that the proceeding lacked basic discovery and the ability to subpoena documents, compel witnesses in a workable time frame. And one last one basically says, the Constitution does have a due process rights that anybody should have, and that gives the Supreme Court an out. It gives the Supreme Court the capacity, the option to say, hey, look, he hasn't even been found guilty of anything. Let's let these cases play out, and then maybe you could pick this up a little bit later. That's just one way that they could get an out, and that might play well politically, more broadly speaking.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of analysis saying that this is going to play into Trump. That this the Hill, there's an editorial saying that this is a gift to Trump because it's going to galvanize his supporters, around the idea that there is this massive conspiracy against him, deep state, including the Colorado Supreme Court apparently, and so. And it'll galvanize his support the same way the charges have done. I question that. I think that that pretty much whatever galvanization is done, I don't think he's going to pick up any more voters from this. I think his supporters are going to be angry. I think his opponents are going to see this as a ruling, as a blessing, and will be angry when the Supreme Court, if they overturn it. I don't think it's going to change the dynamics. It'll probably solidify his win in the within the Republican Party primary, and that's I think that's about it. But I don't think it's going to change the dynamics at all, because the people who feel he's a victim of a deep state conspiracy already feel that way. I don't think this is going to add to those numbers.
Eeny, meeny, chili beanie, the spirits are about to speak.
Are they friendly spirits?
Friendly? Just listen.
This brings us to our predictions. Dave, what do you have for us?
Well, I'm going to pick up on this last segment to say that despite the waves that this made across the country, this case barring Trump from the ballot in Colorado, I think it's a near certainty, or as close to 100% as possible, that the Supreme Court will pick it up. And based on their 6-3 balance, the question is, what is going to be their avenue for basically suspending that or rejecting it? And my prediction is that they realize that their decision is going to affect all 50 states evenly, like a due process or an equal protection claim, and also that they're going to give guidance about how to handle a situation like this and push back to states that they have to follow some procedure that includes a person needing to be convicted of a crime before disqualification.
I'm going to actually predict that it's a 5-4 overturning. I believe Roberts does not want to undermine the 14th Amendment in this case, and they probably will go to some procedural thing. I'm going to predict that they're going to avoid, like the plague, any discussion as to whether or not Trump was in an insurrection or participated in an insurrection. They're going to avoid that, and they probably will try to also avoid the question of whether or not the Section 3 is enforceable by states, because they don't have to. You're not supposed to make constitutional rulings if you don't have to. Not that they're afraid of doing that when they don't have to. They did with Dobbs and the Second Amendment cases. But that's my prediction. I believe that Roberts will vote to uphold it, but it'll go down 5-4. Until next time, stay informed and stay engaged.